Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Gus Kattengell, Jim Eichenhofer. It is the postseason edition, as in it's no longer the season, so it's postseason edition. Does that make any sense to you, Jim?
I think so, yes.
Normally,
I think that's
when
how
you hear
it works.
postseason, though, we're thinking postseason as in playoffs,
Right.
which we'll be talking
I gotcha.
about.
I see where you're going there. Yep.
Yeah. Bottom line, though, our season is done in terms of this campaign, the 2024-2025. But the New Orleans Pelicans podcast wants to take a look back at the season. While we didn't get the goals accomplished that the team wanted, Jim, there's still a lot to get into. We've touched on it the last couple of weeks. And, oh, by the way, there's been changes here as well. So the next couple of weeks, kind of a reset, looking back at several players individually. You'll give us the number here in a sec. And then also moving forward, the next chapter of this organization under Joe Dumars, which we'll touch on shortly.
Yes, Gus, and we've lined up some of the best Pelicans basketball minds to sit down and chat with us over the next few weeks. Basically, the next 3 weeks, every weekday from now until into May, we will be reviewing a player on the Pelicans podcast. This week, we're going to start with Zion Williamson today, Trey Murphy Tuesday, CJ McCollum Wednesday, Herb Jones Thursday, and then wrapping up on Friday with DeJounte Murray. So we ended up with a total of 14 players that we're going to look back at, and we found a nice little convenient kind of cutoff for the minutes played. So any player who played over 504 minutes for the Pelicans this season. I don't know if you noticed the symbol there with that number, but 504.
I see what you did there.
So Kelly Olynyk, for example, played 508 minutes for the Pelicans. So every player that played as much as he did or more, we will be talking about on this podcast over the next few weeks. And by the way, obviously, it has to be a player that finished the season with the Pelicans. We're not going to be talking about the 3 players among the 17 that played that many minutes that are not on the roster now. But we have 14 players. We have 7 different guests lined up, starting with Will Guillory of The Athletic, who will be joining us Monday and Tuesday this week. But that's the plan. This has become kind of a tradition that we've done a bunch of years. I'm not sure how many years it has been, but right. But I'm looking forward to doing that, and always love talking to some of the basketball experts that we have set up for interviews.
No doubt. We're going to lead things off, and that's the baseball term, Jim, as my little league season has already started here as well, with Will Guillory, who is not only doing – is he just the double-duty guy? He really honestly is, right? A little Pels, a little Heat in the past. Now
yeah,
Grizzlies.
Maybe triple duty
yeah.
with the Heat and the Grizzlies and the Pelicans. Yeah, he's had an eventful last little stretch here with, he covered the Grizzlies a little bit during the regular season. Now he's on the beat for them in the playoffs. Experienced on Sunday a 51-point loss, so I can't imagine how that was a lot of fun covering that. But yeah, he's going to be, I think, with Memphis throughout the duration of their playoff stay, which based on Game 1 might not be that long, but either way, he's grinding with Memphis throughout the rest of their playoff run.
All right, no doubt. It should be interesting to see what he looks at 2 players in particular that I would say, am I wrong? And we'll talk about it with him here in a second, but moving forward, when I think of the New Orleans Pelicans, or at least right now, when I think of the New Orleans Pelicans, are they the top 2 players right now that can really light a spark on the floor?
Yeah, I think they might be the 2 most talented guys. They're both in their mid-20s, so there's a lot of runway left in their career. There's a lot of room for them to continue to improve. But yeah, I would say that these are 2 of the headliners and 2 of the guys that we thought it would work really well to have Will Guillory come in and talk specifics about them. I mean, Will is very good, as people will hear, at breaking down, some of the finer details, and it's really enjoyable just sitting around and listening to him talk basketball and some of the intricacies of Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy.
All right, Jim, well, let's get rocking and rolling. Zion Williamson will start things off for us. Will Guillory of The Athletic, his thoughts on Z's season and in the future when it comes to Williamson. Joining us now, Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic. Jim Eichenhofer, always a pleasure when we have him on. There's so much to get into, covering a little bit of the Memphis Grizzlies playoff and postseason run here as well. But look, we start with you, sir, with the player of players on this team that gets the attention, and the attention is for a lot of reason. Zion Williamson. Before Jim peppers you with the hardest questions and podcast postseason reviews, just your overall thoughts, man, when you look at this season. I don't know. I was aboard one of Elon Musk's ships, and I went and tested it and flew to Mars. So I didn't see the season. Describe to me Zion's season.
Man, I will tell you, you probably, I wouldn't say you probably didn't have to watch it, but it's very similar to previous seasons we've seen before, right? Where, when he was on the court, there was so much promise. And I would say this season in particular, I thought it was the best he ever played when he was on the court. You saw the shape he was in. You saw, the way he was moving around, the way he was able to get to his shots, the way he was just able to control the game so often. I thought it was the best he's ever played. But like so often previously in his career, we didn't get to see as much as we wanted because of injuries, because of other circumstances. And he only ends up playing 30 games. And I think, that number would have been inflated a little bit more if he played until the end of the season. By the end, they were kind of just leaning on some of the young guys, and they kind of cut, some of those guys' season short early. But overall, I thought there was some promise there with Zion. But in the end, it's about what it's always about with Zion, which is availability. And unfortunately, he wasn't available enough for this team this year.
We're talking to everyone as we go through this series about kind of maybe some of the more behind the scenes aspects of some of these players. Obviously, we have, one of the top Pelicans writer on the show with us right now, besides myself. And so I wanted to ask you about Zion in terms of, you mentioned you thought that this was some of the best basketball that he's played in his career. What did you see in terms of the difference in his approach to conditioning, or the level that he got in that area, and or how that impacted the way that he performed?
So that was going to be the first thing I mentioned. I think you saw, him consistently putting in the work off the court to get himself right physically. I mean, whenever we would go to practice, we would always see him doing, the one thing you always see when you walk into practice is guys getting up shots, right? Everybody's getting up free throws, getting up extra 3-pointers. And every time we would walk in, we would see Zion running or Zion on the bike or Zion just doing some type of extra conditioning. I think that was a consistent thing with him, just, wanting to get his body right. I thought it was definitely the lightest we've seen him look throughout his career. And with that, with that focus, I thought you just saw his explosiveness go up to a different level this year. And in some ways, I thought it was very Duke Zion-like, and the way he was kind of playing above the rim, blowing past guys in isolation situations. I mean, he's such a dominant force anytime he's on the court. But when he's playing with that level of explosiveness, with that level of quick twitch, he's just impossible to stop. And then you mix in, his improved passing, his understanding of where double teams are coming from. He's just a force out there when he's got that level of focus and that level of conditioning. But I think that the big question for him now is going into an offseason relatively healthy. How can he maintain that? How can he build on it going into next year? I think those are going to be big questions. But I think, the big step for him was kind of figuring out that routine, figuring out the process that he feels comfortable with to get his body to this point. And you saw what it's supposed to look like now. So he set that standard. Now he has to meet that standard consistently going forward.
Will, I'm going to get into a couple stats with you related to Zion in a second. But one of the things I wanted to touch on too was, so his minutes per game this season went from 31.5 last season to 28.6 this season, but he also still set career highs in a bunch of different categories, including rebounds and assists. What do you think was the area that you saw the most improvement for him? This was his 6th season. A lot of times guys kind of level off when they get this far into their career, but what do you think was the area that you noticed the most or liked the most about the jump that he made?
I think there's no question his defense. And I think we saw this, toward the end of last season as he was starting to, round out into shape and kind of figure out some of the things that has worked for him this year with his body. I think, for so much of his career, frankly, he was a liability on that end, right? He was a guy that teams would attack. Teams would kind of point him out and want to attack him in pick and rolls. And I think this year he was so good at being able to time out steals, being able to get out in transition, come over from the weak side and get blocks. And I think a lot of times we would see him, asked to take on that challenge in one-on-one situations to say, I want to guard a Kawhi Leonard. I want to be able to take on an Anthony Edwards in a switch situation if he's trying to attack me. Hey, let him try to bring me over in a pick and roll. I'll take the switch and I'll guard these guys one-on-one and hold my own. And I think we saw him do that more than ever. And I think part of the reason why it was so frustrating early in his career is because we knew he had this in him, right? We saw a lot of this stuff when he was at Duke, the way he can impact the game defensively with his strength, with his explosion of all of the stuff that makes him great on offense. We saw him apply some of those things on defense as well. And when he's kind of dominated on both ends of the court, that's when you start getting into superstar level talk where he can play at an all NBA level. He's up there with those guys all the way at the top of the NBA because of everything he does offensively and the way he can use his defensive skills to create offense for himself or others. So I think that was the huge stuff for him because we know this team relies so much on switching ball screens, allowing Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, all of those guys to be disruptive in that way, and not having Zion Williamson be a guy that they needed to protect in those situations was a huge step.
So what you're saying is he was much less of a pigeon this season, in a term that John Morant has mentioned a few times in recent weeks, that he was not targeted as much as he had been in the past.
Hey, Jim, I love when you get on the new NBA slang. It's always a beautiful thing.
That's right. I'm going to throw a couple numbers at you here from Zion's season, and I want you to, maybe pick which of the two that you would like to discuss or which one kind of stands out to you the most. The first number is 2.7, and that is stocks per 36 minutes for Zion this season, which was a significant jump from his previous career high of 2.1 per 36 minutes. And then the second number is 3, which is he had 3 games of 10-plus assists this season. In the previous 188 games that he played, he had 4 games where he had 10 or more assists. So which of those two numbers do you like, the 2.7 stocks per 36 or the 3 games that he had with 10-plus assists?
Yeah, we just finished talking defense, and we can talk about his passing, and I think that's an area of his game we've seen, gradual improvement throughout his career. And what makes Zion so unique is the fact that he's literally double teamed more than anybody else in the NBA. I would say he's probably triple teamed more than anybody else in the NBA. Whenever this guy has the ball, you got to send multiple bodies his way. You got to send extra help to keep him away from the rim. And I think throughout the course of his career, even, with limited on-court action because of injuries, you've seen him just gain more understanding of how teams are defending him, where that help defender is coming from, where to make that early pass, and just continue to improve over time. And I think it makes him even more dangerous as an offensive weapon, where he can get to his spots consistently, but also he's able to find those three-point shooters on the weak side. He's got a lot better at finding Yves Missi in that dunker spot, throwing lobs up to Yves Missi up at the rim. We saw that game against Minnesota where he pointed out Carlo Makovic to cut from the corner, and then he throws the lob pass to Makovic, and it connects on the alley-oop dunk. That's just the stuff you see over a time where a guy just gets comfortable in his game, understanding NBA defenses, understanding how teams want to attack him. And I think that's what's really developed over time. And that's the unfortunate part about the amount of time that he's missed, because the only way you can get better at that stuff is reps, right? It's on court. It's seeing the stuff in action. And I think he's been able to make these improvements despite, playing 30 games in a season and missing big chunks of seasons. And it kind of tells you, what type of mind he has for the game. We talk about his physical gifts all the time, but I don't think we give him enough credit for his mind for the game, his IQ, the way he's able to read the floor, because of the reasons I said, because he sees so many double teams and people throw so many bodies at him. He's got to be able to see the game differently and understand, these help defenders differently. And I think the more he improves as a passer, the more difficult it's going to be to defend him, especially when you got, Trey Murphy, stretching out to 30 feet where, how can you defend Zion at the rim and Trey Murphy at the three-point line? It's really difficult. So I think that's something that you want to continue to see them improve upon over time, is just that complement of each other and understanding, how to attack defenses when they throw some of these junk coverages at Zion.
Lastly, from me on Zion, I think some of this might be obvious, but what do you want to see from him next season? What do you want to see from him going forward? What do you think are some of the goals that he should make for this offseason and then kind of going forward in his career?
The obvious one is just staying on the court, right? Just staying healthy, staying consistent with his routine, being in great shape. I think that'll put him in position to at least, have better odds, right? Some of the stuff you can't control, right? Some of the injuries we've seen him sustain is like stuff that's just, out of your control. Like at the end of the season, we saw him take the hard fall in Minnesota and miss a couple games due to the back injury. But you want to see him do whatever he can to avoid the hamstring injuries that have become a real issue for him in the past. And I think, we talked about other guys like Stephen Curry with his ankles. A big part of Steph's routine in the offseason is strengthening his legs, strengthening his ankles to avoid future ankle problems. And I think Zion needs to take those same measurements with his hamstrings, or just with his lower half in general, to put himself in a better situation to avoid some of these injuries. But also, something that we've talked about a lot with Zion is just adding that little mid-range jumper to his game, being comfortable stepping into 8 feet, 10-foot jumpers where teams are just giving you so much space. It's just easy to step into some of these shots and just add that little part to his game, just to give defense something to think about. Obviously teams are going to dare him to take jumpers regardless, even if he makes 3, 4, 5 in a game. But just having that second thought for a defender, that level of hesitation where you're not sure what he's going to do, I think that's going to make it even more difficult to defend him. So I think that's the one thing I would like to see, is just a couple more middies a game, and just also of course just continuing to improve defensively and understanding where to be, what to do in certain situations.
Before we let you go, just your opinion on this. Jim and I have talked a little bit about this during the season, and I think probably you and I here as well. If you were asked, you just happen to be walking by ownership, management, whatever, and ask you, what about the minutes restriction? I'm in favor of maybe starting the season that way, 28, 30, 32, something like that nature, post All-Star break, then bump them up. And it just, I don't know, it worked. He was efficient. I don't know if it put him in a mindset of being aggressive because there's so many only minutes in, that he had the night. I don't know. How do you stand on that?
Well, Jim can tell you sitting next to me during games that I'm not a huge fan of the minutes restriction. That's where we defer a little bit. It drove me kind of crazy this year. So often in fourth quarters, just watching Zion sit on the bench while some of these leads would slip away. I do think I can understand, like, hey, it worked, right? He played so well under the minutes restriction. He was able to stay relatively healthy towards the end of the season. But in general, we're talking a difference of maybe 4 or 5 minutes during the course of games. The difference between playing 28 minutes and playing 34 minutes, we're talking about just 2-3 minute stretches in the first half and second half. So I think a lot of this is just, of course, you want to be safe, you want to be precautionary, but some of this stuff, man, you got to let a guy play. You got to let a guy figure this out, because at some point he's going to have to play 35, 38 plus minutes if you want to win big games. So he's got to be able to build up that conditioning. I think you hear a lot of Knicks players talk about this, where they say, hey, so much of the outside world complains about our minutes, that Tibbs plays us too much, but we're conditioned for this throughout the course of the season. We play big minutes all year, so when we get to the playoffs, it's not a big difference for us. And I think with Zion, I think you need to get him to the point where he just doesn't feel set playing 28 minutes every game, because that's not how you win games. Of course, Zion's numbers were really good. He looked really good playing 28 minutes during the second half of the season, but they lost a lot of those games. And I would say partially because of those stretches where he was on the bench. I would tweet out a lot lot during the season. Hey, Zion Williamson was a +4 in this game, but the Pels lost by 8. That was something we saw consistently during the course of the second half of the season. So I think you just got to prepare him to get to the next level of his game, being able to play big minutes consistently, being able to show up consistently, playing back-to-backs, all of the stuff you would demand from any other superstar around the NBA. Of course, his track record is different. There's a level of caution you got to bring in with Zion because of his body, because of his injury history. But at the end of the day, he's got to be able to take this load on at some point, and you got to start at some point to put that on him. And I think just leaving him on a minutes restriction kind of limits him and limits the team as well because of the level of impact he makes when he's out there.
Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic, as always, appreciate the time, and thank you for the knowledge, sir.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all.
Our thanks to Will of The Athletic, who, again, as Jim said, he'll probably be covering half the Western Conference by the time, and Eastern Conference. Let's give him a third of the league. What do you think? Looks like the whole Gulf Coast?
I think Will can handle it, although I do wonder if after the season that he just went through covering various teams and controversies and Jimmy Butler and Memphis firing their coach, if he's ready for a little breather right now. If the Grizzlies get knocked out, maybe we'll see Will on a beach shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I don't know if he could cover a boring season now you think about it, right? I mean, from player trades to dismissals, all that and more. All right, look, as we mentioned, the playoffs are underway. And the Western Conference we're going to focus on here on the pod, Jim, because after all, that's where the Pelicans play there as well. Look, we've seen some things that have been pretty impressive. OKC, that first game against Memphis was like, hey, we are the number one seed. But look, Clippers, Nuggets on Monday. And on Tuesday, you got Grizzlies and Thunder. What stands out about those two series so far for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Clippers-Nuggets was probably the best game of the weekend of the first 2 days of the playoffs. I mean, it was really compelling basketball. Just the fourth quarter. I saw somebody tweeted, I think after Saturday's game, something to the effect of, this feels like a completely different sport than what we witnessed over the previous 6 months. And I think the Nuggets-Clippers was definitely the best example of that, of just the intensity goes up so much and you're locked in on every single possession. The guys sitting out games or sitting out back-to-backs, that's over. There's no more back-to-backs. So it was a really fun watch on Saturday afternoon to watch that game. And it was also a crazy ending where, I mean, the Nuggets are up by 1. There's about a 3-second difference between the shot clock and the game clock. And Russell Westbrook attacks the rim with like 12 seconds left. He did that in the regular season too. And I'm just wondering, like, the guy's an awesome player. He's been an MVP before. But it's like there's like a time and score situation thing that I feel like if you're a Nuggets fan, you got to be losing your mind over that because it burned them in the regular season in a game against Minnesota, and it almost cost them again against the Clippers.
Right.
But they were able to pull out the win in overtime. But, yeah, that was a really great opener, and I'm looking forward to the rest of that series as well. As far as the Grizzlies and OKC goes, I mean, I can't believe how one-sided that game was. And by the way, I hate to even bring this up, but they mentioned how the most one-sided, there's been 2 games in the history of the NBA playoffs where the final margin was 58 points. Unfortunately, one of them was 2009 when Denver played here in Game 4 of that first-round series. So I was kind of rooting a little bit for OKC to break that record so that wouldn't be the case anymore, that New Orleans wouldn't be in the record books. But either way, I mean, it was 94-47, I remember at one point. You know, you don't see too often deep in the third quarter that a team has twice as many points as their opponent. But, yeah, you mentioned this a second ago. It was just impressive by the Thunder that it seemed like they've been waiting around for the last 10 days or so just for their chance to just show people, like, not only were we the 1 seed in the West, which is impressive on its own, but they lapped the field. They won, 15 more games than everybody else. They ended up with 68 wins, which was the 7th most wins in the history of the league. So, I mean, there's nothing else you could say, but that was just what a showing by them to just come out and just thump Memphis in every way.
Were you surprised?
I was surprised that it was that big of a margin, but I mean, you would say that with any playoff game. I think any team that's in the playoffs, you don't expect them to be down 55 in the second half or whatever.
And it's so hard too. Memphis had to put in so much effort just to get to that game, right? To get there as well.
That's another thing that I thought about that stands out to me. If you remember back to 22 when the Pelicans, or even last year, or it wasn't as much the case in 24 as in 22. The Pelicans had a really hard-fought play-in game to get into the playoffs against the Clippers. Then less than 48 hours later, they had to turn around and play game 1 against Phoenix. They lost that game. They looked a little worn out, maybe more mentally and emotionally than physically, and then they came back and won game 2 at Phoenix. I just think it's a hard turnaround to be going from, and in the Memphis's case, they played the late game on Friday night and then they played the earliest game on Sunday. So I mean, it was a rapid thing, and I don't think it's the kind of thing where it's like your legs are gone. I think it's just hard to get ramped back up mentally to play, the best team in the league record-wise in such a short turnaround. So maybe Memphis in game 2 will look better, but I mean, that was about as discouraging as it gets as far as an opener to a series.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, again, we're off and running. 13 more player profiles to come your way. Trey Murphy will be next, and that will also be with Mr. Will Guillory. Be sure to check those out, and all of these on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast, anywhere you get those as well. Plus, of course, you can literally go to the team's website. And, of course, this week, we'll have plenty of coverage on Joe Dumars becoming the new Vice President of Basketball Operations for your Pelicans, so stick around for that. In the meantime, thanks for listening. Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, thank you.
Thanks, Gus.
I'm Gus Kattengell. We'll see you next time on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.